Welcome back here to World Talks on TVP World. Now, we're 7 weeks away from the U.S. presidential elections. Now, its outcome is going to have far-reaching consequences, not just for Americans, but particularly for Poland and Central Europe as they navigate the ongoing war in Ukraine. Now, today we'll be diving into how Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's foreign policies could possibly reshape diplomatic relations with Poland, with a special focus on the Polish-American vote. Now, joining me now to discuss is Professor of American Studies at the University College Dublin, Scott Lucas. Good morning, Professor. Thank you so much for being with us here today on World Talks on TVP World.
Thank you for having me here.
Professor, so Poland's president is allegedly going to meet Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump at a campaign event, right? It's going to take place in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is quite a significant location for the Polish-American community that houses some 700,000, if not more, Polish Americans. Now, how significant is Duda's decision to possibly be joining Trump at this campaign event in Pennsylvania, and particularly for Polish-American voters?
Well, it's significant in this U.S. election because Pennsylvania is one of what we call the swing states. It's the states that will decide whether Donald Trump or Kamala Harris becomes the president in November. In 2020, the margin between Joe Biden and Donald Trump was only 80,000 votes. So as you mentioned, with more than 700,000 Polish Americans in Pennsylvania, they could be decisive in Pennsylvania and thus in the U.S. election. Now, it's important for Donald Trump because he likes to be flattered by world leaders. You might recall in the debate last week that he kept talking about how he was supported by Viktor Orban of Hungary, that he's always been very worthy of Vladimir Putin of Russia or Kim Jong-un of North Korea because they have flattered him. He'll do the same thing with Duda. But beyond that, I think it's important for Poland. I think it's important in terms of, all right, what is going on here between the president and the Tusk government? And I think the easiest explanation for me as an analyst is that Duda's visit allows the government, even though it may disagree with Duda, it may be at a different position than Duda as it comes to Trump, it enables them to maintain a line to Trump's advisors should he win the election in November.
That's quite a smart strategy that you're pointing out. Now, Professor, let me ask you. Kamala Harris referenced Poland during the debate with Trump in the Ukraine conflict. In the context, she said, I quote, Putin would be sitting in Kiev with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. Now, what does this reveal about the importance of Polish-American voters in the upcoming U.S. election?
I think this was a very clear message specifically to the Polish-American voters in Pennsylvania, because remember, the debate was in Philadelphia. I think that's one reason why the Trump people want to have him appear with Duda, to try to counter that. But I think the broader message is important here. Let us be clear. Kamala Harris has supported Ukraine against Russia's 31-month invasion. She has supported the need to bolster defenses in Central Europe, whether we're talking about the Baltic states, whether we're talking about Poland against the threat of Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has blackmailed Ukraine, froze military aid in 2019 because they would not spread disinformation about Joe Biden, and he supports the Kremlin's line on peace talks. So for those Polish Americans who have the Ukraine as their top priority for the election, I think Harris was sending out a clear message, which is vote for me. For those Polish Americans who will vote on other issues, let's say the economy, let's say healthcare, let's say women's rights, of course, the Ukraine issue may not matter quite as much.
Now, Poland seems to be taking quite a dual approach to this U.S. election. How do you see Poland's conservative government essentially balancing its support for Trump, but at the same time being open to cooperate with Kamala Harris should she become the president of the United States?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, that's quite a wise strategy, which is, clearly with Kamala Harris, it's easier to read this. She has been vice president under the Biden administration. The Biden administration has been vital for Poland. It's been vital for Europe and for NATO in the face of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So you hope for continuity in that relationship and even to boost it just a bit. Let's say, for example, the issue of whether you have long-range strikes inside Russia by aircraft supplied by the West. In terms of Donald Trump, I think, let's be honest here, that President Duda has sort of more of a personal affinity for Donald Trump. He has met him before, but I think the Polish government here has to be put in the wider context of what's happening with Europe. Donald Trump has threatened to pull the United States out of NATO. He has threatened to effectively abandon the defense of Europe, including the defense of Poland. The Polish government wants to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, do you do that by insulting Trump? Do you do that by not meeting Trump? No, you try to win him over. You try to persuade him. I'm not sure Donald Trump can be persuaded. I'm not sure if he gets angry enough at Europe, whether you can keep him from imposing his threats, whether it be over withdrawal from NATO or imposing tariffs on European products. But you at least have to try to keep communications open.
Now, professors, I mean, you're mentioning Trump here. Now, in a recent op-ed, Trump campaigners, Robert Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. Criticized Biden once again, undermining, of course, their aid, the continuation of the aid for Ukraine. Now, is this going to limit Biden's ability to allow the use of long-range weapons against targets within Russia? What can you tell me on this?
I think the issue of long-range weapons, and I expect this to be resolved in the next few days, will be distinct from the election because it will not be U.S.-made, what are called ATACMS missiles that are used for the strikes. Instead, the U.S. will give permission for British-made Storm Shadows to be used for the strikes. So I don't think, the threat by Donald Trump Jr. and by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Affects the long-range missile issue. Indeed, I don't think it affects the election because I've got to be honest with you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a bit unstable, makes some very wild statements and puts out conspiracy theories. So does Donald Trump Jr. Where there may be an effect long-term, both for Ukraine and Poland, is if you have a Republican majority in Congress. If Trumpists are part of that Republican majority, they, I think, will threaten further military aid to Ukraine, further economic aid to Ukraine, and thus indirectly they will threaten Poland. So the issue here is not just the presidential election we should be watching, but it should be what happens in the races for the House and for the Senate in the United States.
Okay, but now let's look at the long-term implications for a moment. I mean, you mentioned also the relationship with the European Union. Now, how could Poland's involvement in U.S. politics, I mean, again, we're talking about a huge Polish-American community, not just in Pennsylvania, but in the United States overall. How could this affect its international standing and its relationship within the EU?
Well, I think it's always important, although we talk about how important the U.S. is, to realize that a country like Poland is not just simply looking at Washington. Poland's economic development, Poland's social development, Poland's security also matters in terms of its relationship with the European Union, with NATO, with European countries. So what I think you're going to see here from President Duda, from the Tusk government, and from others will be an attempt to bring everything together. If you have a Harris presidency in the United States, it's easier because the Harris presidency will work with the European Union. It will cooperate with the European Union. If you have a Trump presidency, it's different. In his first term, Donald Trump had advisors who wanted to break up the European Union. They literally wanted to shatter the bloc. Not sure he'll go quite as far in the second term, but in case he does, it's important for Poland to be able to say to the United States, look, we stand with you. We believe in a strong Polish-American relationship, but we also believe in a strong European Union for the welfare of all of us. Donald Trump tends to be a politician who thinks only about the good of one person, Donald Trump. Poland has an opportunity here to say, we need to be thinking about the welfare of everyone in the US, in Europe, including Poland, but also in the international community amidst the unprecedented threat from Vladimir Putin.
Professor, let me ask you about Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky's victory plan. Yesterday, he mentioned that this victory plan that we don't really know much detail about is ready. Is he rushing against the clock because we're just weeks shortly away from the U.S. elections? Or what else can you tell me about this victory plan and his goals?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. We don't know the details of the victory plan, but we know the general outlines that Zelensky has been promoting. And that is, look, this is not a case of defending Ukraine while Russia eventually wins. The situation has changed, first of all, with Ukraine's incursion, which has taken about 1,300 square kilometers of the Kursk region in Russia. So Zelensky will say, this is part of my victory plan. He will say, okay, we want a diplomatic approach to Russia, but we want this to be based on a Russian withdrawal from Ukraine. There will be no Russian seizure of territory, at least beyond Crimea, that will be recognized. That's the start of the negotiations under the victory plan. He will ask for ongoing economic and financial support, where even if Ukraine is not yet a member of the European Union, but it's on the way to being so, that will be part of the victory plan. To be honest with you, the importance here, because he'll be presenting this at the UN General Assembly in New York, is not to get agreement on this plan at this point, but it is to show that the international community is behind this. Our best estimate is that Russia, if Russia is going to defeat Ukraine, it has to do so in the next 12 months. If it cannot do so in 2025, it won't do so after that because of longer-term economic as well as military issues. So what Zelensky has got to do is to ensure that over the next year, the international community does not abandon Ukraine. In other words, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
And very interesting to see how that's all going to play out, particularly with Zelensky's trip that he's going to make very soon to the United States. Thank you so much, Professor Scott Lucas of American Studies at the University College in Dublin. Thank you for being with us here on World Talks on TVP World.
Thanks to you and your viewers.
And that's all for this edition of World Talks. I'm Diana Skaya. Stay tuned and up next for more news here on TVP World.